Okay, well, thank you everybody for being in the session today. This is a track around developing a mature security visibility strategy for our OT and IoT. My name is Reynaldo Gonzalez. I work for Cummins as part of the manufacturing side in this field, and my role as a principal cybersecurity architect. We're more like a strategic advisor, consultant within the company. We work a lot with different groups in the organizations to look at the security side. But one of the other big things that I do is also leading the support for our OT cybersecurity and our OT program. Now, just a brief disclaimer. The information, the views, opinions that I talk about today are solely my own. They don't represent on behalf of my company or any of the companies I worked for in the past or any affiliations. So this is just for informational. So now what we're going to be getting into is around like getting to the mature visibility side, but how do we get there? And there's really three key areas that I want to be able to talk about that are very important to think about is the stakeholder side, the way we engage and when we engage. Things that can help influence our decision with choosing the right approach and what are the areas that can impact those decisions. And then some strategies around how we think about visibility and things that can influence the options that we can work with. So to start off, let's talk about the infamous, target breach. Well, what's really the big deal? Why is this such an issue? How are we targets, or why would we ever be targets? And when it comes to the environment, to having a good sense of what's in your network or what's not in your network, and or knowing what it is, you can't protect what you can't see. It becomes difficult to do that. So in the target case, you have these attackers that were able to compromise a third-party vendor side, and they were able to leverage their credentials of remote access, and that's how they pivoted into the target network and they're able to steal all this information from target, and that's what caused a data breach. But the key issue here is around the visibility side. Do they have controls in place? Yes, it's possible. But were they lacking? Yes, very likely. So now when we think about how do we approach this from visibility, we want to make sure that we're targeting the right areas, the right approach, and for the right use cases, the right value that's bringing not just for one organization or one group, but for multiple groups, something that provides value to other groups. So we need to know the environment and see what's going on, not just with who's connecting to what and where, but who are the ones that are accessing the environment. We have a way to centralize that information, that visibility, and know what's at risk or how we can identify the risk. Being able to see the behavior, the traffic, the movement to know if there's a risk with lateral movement or from traffic that goes in and out of the site. So let's start in the beginning with understanding who do we talk to? What are the stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders? Where are they part of that? We need to be thinking about early on in our journey if you're trying to get to this visibility approach. There's groups from the operation side, from security, from compliance, your vendors, your engineering, your IT, they all play important roles. Even though in some groups they might have smaller part in that role, they're still important because they tie into your strategy and your approach. When we talk about the security side for those stakeholders, there could be a number of different groups that we got to think about. Whether it's your SOC team, if it's your operations team, if it's the threat intel or the architecture team, they all have inputs that can help provide the right level of information to know that when you bring in a particular tool, the different features and capabilities that are offered with that tool can tie into their processes, into information that can help streamline other types of directives around incident response and getting the right type of intel for vulnerabilities or for groups that can make use of that information. Your operations and your compliance side is important because if you understand the way the processes work, you know the way this tool can be used across different groups and the way the tool can be operationalized. On the compliance, being able to engage with those stakeholders, if they're part of the cyber, of the IT, or part of the other areas of corporate, knowing what are the different regulations and compliance that you should be leveraging to ensure that the tool you bring in and how you bring it in is meeting those requirements. We can't forget about the vendors because there's the vendor component of the solution you're looking into, and there's also the vendor areas of who are those third party or contractors or vendor options that are in the environment that you might need to use what you gain out of the visibility to ask further questions about the behaviors or a baseline of what those devices do. But the two important ones that I have here is your IT and your engineering. IT is important because they have the infrastructure, they know the environment. And talking to them, understanding the way the design is laid out, the way the architecture is built, what's standard, what's not standard can help you figure out a direction and approach you want to take. But the most important is engineering, the control side, those BU groups. They know the environment. They know the different assets, the different factors, what's normal or what is important for them and how to engage with them early on so you know already they have those conversations going. Now, there will be challenges, there will be some resistance you're going to get from the BU, from the OT, the engineering side. There's going to be misalignment. There's going to be different goals and business objectives that don't align with the IT, security, and the OT. But we need to get buy-in and we need to be able to work with them, leverage leadership in that communication to have those conversations where you can then prioritize and understand their goals, what they're trying, what they have, and using security as a way to build that as part of enabling the business. So building relationships, building that trust is very key. That's how we can be able to overcome some of these challenges. Start engaging early, walk with them the floors, understand their lingo, and talk to them in terms they can understand. We come from the security side, or we may have the mindset of looking at the risk, but we can't talk to them in terms of security or in that kind of risk. Talk to them in ways that they understand about uptime, downtime, the way they can use the information of the visibility tool to troubleshoot issues or configuration changes and looking back at historical changes. And in addition to that, basically telling them, yeah, we're going to secure the environment. You can do all these things more effectively, efficiently, faster, but we're also be able to secure it. You don't have to worry about that part. So having those conversations and in a way that's non-disruptive to the environment to get their buy-in. So now, if we look at when we're trying to make a decision or what can influence our thought process to look at some of these different tooling options, there's factors that are related from indirect and indirect approach. The direct approach is there can be requirements on the business side that has certain type of SLA or requirements around uptime and type of downtime that they're able to tolerate and the way the business needs to continue to operate. The compliance side, depending if the organization or the company is a global company that has locations across different countries, different regions, we got to take that into account because there may be different standards or regulations around 62443, if it's the ISO, if it's the NIST CSF or other NIST standards, SIP or other options that are dictating certain controls and areas of how you look at visibility, that has to be factored into that process. Also understanding the landscape, knowing the way different attack vectors can happen from IT to OT, that can help influence where you think about visibility and where you want to capture that information. The indirect side is things that can, where you may get some impression that you have the budget to bring in the visibility tool, but then you realize based on the scope and the effort and how this solution expands, you run into some constraints. That can be a challenge around maybe pre-planning and making sure that you have the information if it was lacking in the beginning. But there's also the side of skills gap. You can have the best of breed of tool or the least effective tool or somewhere in between and bring in a solution to get the insight you need. But if you don't have the team that can operationalize the tool, that can take value of that information and provide it to the consumers, the users that can benefit from that information, then that tool goes nowhere, becomes ineffective. So having the right skill set from the OT side on the IT and the cyber to leverage that information is it's also very key. Another important one is the culture side and what is the business and the leader side of the tolerance they can address with the risk. Depending on that culture, that can be a challenge where it becomes difficult to impact change and have those conversations. So for there, you want to have support from the leadership to help drive the message across the leadership, but also top down to help drive the direction and the prioritization to provide that support. But don't just leave it up to the leadership side. Depending on where you are in that part of the organization, you also want to work laterally and having those conversations, build those relationships with those different groups. So now, when we're trying to prioritize and think about the strategy around here, what are the ways that we can do that? What do we have to think about? Well, we want to focus on what matters. And it may depend on the environment. It depends on different organizations and the different regulations that can dictate how you approach it. But knowing where are your critical assets, what is defined as your critical assets, where does your intellectual property sit? And either you have some tools that can help determine or discover where that is, a way to tell you this is where your IP sits and this is where it's being transferred or being accessed, that can tie into a data security strategy if it exists and how it's being leveraged to control that information. But other ways how we identify that are risk assessments and conversations with the business to understand the environment. The risk assessments can provide a good insight to tell you your current state analysis. Where are you today? Where are you trying to get to? And that may involve different pillars of different areas you want to address, from a program governance side to visibility to something around segmentation or remote access or different areas. But it provides the insight that you can use, know where you begin and what you're trying to cover. The conversations that you have with the business can really provide value, because now you understand where those critical areas are just by talking to them. They know the environment, they know the space. And what is very key to be able to understand their functional areas and what's considered baseline. When you get those details and you get that information, you can then put together already at least a starting point, your success criteria. What are the different KPIs and measurements that you want to look at with when you collect that data, that information, and provide the visibility of those contextual points across the environment, how it can help those teams, because now you're tailoring the input you've gained, their information, their objectives, and now using the tool as a way to reinforce if they're on par with the direction they're going, or some gaps you can find for them that would improve on their efficiency and make things easier for them. So now effective strategies can depend on a few different things. We want to understand also, where do we sit today in our current environment? What are some gaps that we typically have with some of these strategies? Understand that there's legacy equipment, and we know there's a legacy equipment on the OT side, but where is that legacy equipment and what do they connect to? Sometimes those legacy equipment or different assets or workstations can be on segmented areas. They can be on air gap networks with no true connection to anywhere else, or there may just be an isolated or segmented off from the corporate network or the site environment. There's also environments where you have dual NIC scenarios where a workstation has one connection to the corporate and another connection into that OT space or IoT space that is supposed to be segmented off with nothing else going through that network except through that dual NIC device. We lack that inventory and not able to see the monitoring in all areas. We may have blind spots where some areas are not effectively segmented, but we can improve on those by doing an approach on getting the right level of visibility. If we're trying to target visibility with just discovery or discovery with threat detection and the security insight, trying to look at how are these devices communicating, where are they talking to, and is that considered a normal baseline? Taking that as a way to improve what we can't see in the environment. But something else we have to think about too is the integration side with some of these tools. When you look at a visibility tool, look at it further just beyond on what it offers and the capabilities, but how does the data and the contextual information of that visibility context provide enrichment or more viewpoints into other tools, where you integrate that tool to other security tools for enrichment of their information, or vice versa. The visibility tool can only learn so much about what's in the environment and what exists, but sometimes if we integrate with other tools, if it's like something on the asset management side or some firewall tooling or some other remote access or segmentation type tools, that can provide insight that you could leverage those details, ingest it to enhance your security posture, and you get this bigger viewpoint of how the discovered data can provide or enhance policies from a security perspective. At the same time, using that information that's improving or that is helping the OT run efficiently in their operations. So,
Reynaldo, we
yes,
did have a question.
sure. Yep, go ahead.
How do we handle the challenge of projecting ROI for budget approval?
Mhm. And that's a good one, because a lot of times we want to be able to approach this from a risk of, okay, there's a risk here, but we have to talk about it in a sense of business loss and the impact. So when we want to approach it to the ROI, say, well, how do we get the return on investment on leveraging this tool? Let's take the approach of talking in terms of, if we have an impact here and we have this downtime, but we cannot identify what happened, how it happened, or where it happened, like what caused it, then the loss of impact in terms of minutes or hours can be very detrimental. So there's a value to that, because we cannot see that information. So if we can take those inputs, that information, talking to the business and just ask them a direct question, like, hey, if this area goes down, how much is it going to cost us, per day, per hour, per minute? You're gonna get this big number. It could be in the millions of downtime. But then when you ask, well, how would you be able to recover from that if you know or don't know what happened and what's the next step to address it? Then that can also be an impact to understanding how you fix that issue. So if you take that information and leverage it in a way that, if we cannot see these issues because we lack in these areas, this is where we're standing to lose from a risk in a financial loss and impact. So then bringing in a tool to show the value and how it can operationalize and optimize the use of this information can increase the ROI, where we can reduce the likelihood of that happening, or we'll be able to recover faster from it, because we know the way all these things are connecting and where they're going. Any other question?
Nope, that's it so far. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let me touch a little bit on this part here. I want to mention, if we look at this a little bit architecturally, when we look at a visibility tool, what does this look like, or what are the different areas we got to think about when we're trying to tap or span our environment, and where do we gain the visibility? So on one side, the left side, it's a very simple architecture and a collapsed core, where you have your layer 3 gateway, your layer 3 hop on the top, on the core side, and all your other switches are your access switches. Basically, that's where all your devices connect, and the way they're on different VLANs, different networks that they are connected to. The right side, same thing, but just a different type of architecture model, where you have a three-tier approach of your core, your distro, and your access. In this case, your gateway of your devices, your assets, is most likely sitting at the distro side. When we think about putting visibility into the environment, we need to understand what approach we want to go with. Do we want to go with tapping or spanning? They both have their pros and cons. When you tap, you're tapping a link or multiple links. But a key thing to see is that if you're going to be tapping, you may be tapping, say, these links here, but maybe you don't have the resource or the time or other limitations to tap these other areas. Those can be some gaps where you're not able to see this information. When you span across the switches, or on each of these switches, you can capture all that traffic that's going through that switch. So when you're looking at spanning and your tapping environment, you want to understand how is the traffic being switched at layer 2, and how is it being routed at layer 3. And to have that kind of insight, if you don't already understand the background with that side of the networking component, this is where it makes a lot of sense to have and involve your IT, your network, your LAN engineers that understand this environment, that can provide you some of this insight to help understand the way this traffic moves. Because when you span in some locations, let's say if you span here in these top areas, any traffic that moves laterally in this area below the switch, you won't see unless you're spanning there. If you're tapping across these links up here, you won't see the traffic that's here, because this links are only capturing traffic that goes through, these tabs are only capturing the traffic that goes to those links. Same thing happens over here. So understanding the implications, knowing what are your options. Do you want to capture and deploy across all areas or just in some areas? When you have that information and you know the network, you can understand the impact and where it makes sense to have those capture points at the switch level or across the links. So here, there should be a poll that comes up, but I just want to curious to see what does the audience think when you have this information about, or the options, what tends to be an approach you choose. So while folks are looking at the poll, I'll just talk through these. But when you're choosing the right approach, think about these different areas. It might be a combination of some of these things. But when you're looking at the visibility side, are you trying to do, second, this is, oh, I think I gotta let the poll finish. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I can't let me advance. Oh, there we go. Okay. So when you think about the visibility, what is the effect you're looking at? Do you go full visibility, or are you looking for a cost-effective approach? Are you trying to address a compliance requirement to just get asset inventory, or are you trying to get an inventory that gives you the security insights? Look at the traffic, what goes north-south, entering and leaving the site, or east-west, where you can apply other types of integrations with other tools to have some of those controls in place. When you look at the architecture side, looking at what is scalable. When you think about if you want to tap or you span, do you go across the full site, or can you think of an aggregation model, of an approach where you don't have to do sensors at every location, but you can capture all the different switches or different links into an area where it gets captured or aggregated together, and there you have your sensor deployment to get that information. You can dedupe the traffic there, where that gives you a more scalable approach, and then you can leverage the same aggregation to feed into other tools for monitoring and traffic. In some situations, you got to think about the agent side at the workstation level. If there's any kind of dual NIC environment where you have the visibility on the corporate network side, but due to maybe budget constraints where you don't have enough coverage to cover other areas, you may have to think about an agent approach or some kind of software application where any traffic that goes to that dual NIC, you can provide that view. These connection points that are dual NIC tends to be a bridge from a segmented area that has a lot of legacy, outdated software where it is very prone to different types of exploits or vulnerabilities that you don't want connected to your corporate network. And the only way something can get through is through that connection point, that dual NIC area. But you want to have that visibility where maybe it makes no sense to deploy a sensor there. Maybe it's a small environment, but you can do that visibility through that connection point, through like an agent approach. Uh, let's see. So here I see the poll. I think the poll just finished. So here it looks like the most 60% they're using a mix of these approaches. That's good because we want to look at these different options. I'm looking at architecture scalability and the inventory side with security. So it sits around those lines, and a lot of this ties into the way it goes to your compliance requirements and how you tie in these factors, these viewpoints into other tools. So now, what I would like for you to get out of this is a few key takeaways: is engage your stakeholders early. Access, make sure you understand the environment, know what factors can influence your decision, know the difference between your direct impact and your indirect, what can help influence that. When you have that information in place, then you can look at this layered approach and understand your options for a security visibility. How do you deploy it? You want to go full deployment across the site, or only on critical areas that make sense based on where your critical assets are located? So if you have to think about this, where are you in your journey? Are you new in your journey? Do you already have a visibility strategy in place? Do you already have a tool in place? Can it be better? Can it be optimized, or now complemented with other capabilities? So wherever you are in this part of your program, in the process of bringing in a security tool, think of a few things. Think of this as a checklist of areas that maybe you've already done or you're looking to do. Don't think of this as something being very exhaustive, that it's only, these are the only areas, but there's many different things to consider. But at a high level, important ones that really stick out is very key: relationship building. You got to build a business, you got to build the trust with those business, understand the stakeholders. Like I mentioned earlier, that's an early on concept to already have that conversation, that communication going. Partner with the right groups, understand the requirements you're trying to solve for that tooling, what you want to get out of it, but not just from a tool. Understand also the requirements and the use cases that can be beneficial by those groups. When you work with the BU groups, understand their challenges or pain points. What are things that they're doing today, maybe that is manual, or if you bring in this viewpoint, can help optimize their information, their processes. Know the network. If you know the way this is architected, the design, the way traffic is routed, layer 2, layer 3, you can help determine an effective approach that gets into the right level of areas where you want to tap or where you want to span into. And from there, you know what your critical assets you're protecting or an area of the site that you're trying to protect because they're all relevant to that visibility direction you're trying to do. And there you can choose the best option. Once you have all those components in place and you get the visibility, then you can start normalizing the data with conversations and inputs across the different BU groups, the different infrastructure teams that to make sure that the value out of the tool is not just a security purpose, but is also providing value and insight to the teams that can consume the data and help them in their processes. That's it for this. So I thank everybody for being here, and I'm happy to take any additional questions or thoughts.
Turn the audio on. Looks like we have some applause. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. There was just the one that you were kind enough to answer earlier on. Okay. Excellent use of time, Reynaldo. That's about as perfect as it gets.
I just realized I forgot to share the results, but I just shared the results of the poll. So I can't see it on my screen, but I see the poll when it came up. So hopefully, I guess this way others can see kind of where the results were.
Yes, the winner by far is a mix of these approaches. So 60% of the vote or poll.
All right.
Very good.
Well, I'm happy to connect anytime if anyone wants to reach out too. So please feel free to reach out, message me, or through the event today. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
All right. For everyone else, as well as myself, thank you very much, Reynaldo. Great presentation. Very much appreciated.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.